On live. So Donald, I just want to dive in and Mykonos. So so have you having a relative in that is Greek? Have you gone over there frequently?
Yeah, we have, man. My shout outs to my amazing sister-in-law, Aria. Um, because of her, we get to visit Greece pretty often. So we went for 2 weeks last year. This year we'll go for roughly 2 weeks, but there'll be two different trips.
Mhm.
Um, she has all the recommendations for us. We typically like to get on a boat in Halkidiki, which is like one of the port cities near where she's from, Thessaloniki, and do some island hopping, man. There's over 500 Greek islands,
Yeah.
and she was able to really teach us a lot about the history, which is due to plate tectonic shifts, and the amount of volcanoes in like near the Aegean and the Mediterranean. They would, a volcano would erupt, and then that tectonic shift would happen, and then when it erupted again, it would be again even more new islands. And so anyone who tells you they've been to every Greek island is likely not telling you the truth, because they have so many that are like uninhabited, but it's by far one of the most beautiful places on the planet. So I strongly encourage anybody to go.
Wow.
I'll
Yeah.
definitely want to do that. I do a lot of beach hopping here, and probably not as beautiful as your beaches. But we hop in a little boat. We even take our dogs and we just beach hop. It's just great. So I just would love to visit your location. I'm gonna have to research that.
Oh yeah, I keep a list of referrals in different cities, in order to provide access to people. When they name a city, they're like, oh, I'm going to London. I'm like, oh, I got a list of referrals. So I'll send you a list of referrals for Greece, and you have to let me know which ones you like and which ones you're like, no, Donald, you might want to take that one off the list.
Okay, I have a question for you, because I also do a lot of networking. I'm a very social person, as you
Okay.
probably kind of tell.
I can never tell.
Maybe I make friends everywhere, but here's my challenge. How do you keep track of all your contacts in all those locations? What's your technology or your technique?
That's a great one. I would probably say I have three ways for me to keep in contact with people. I think the first one is social media. It's just the easiest way, whether it's LinkedIn, which is probably the majority of where I like keep in contact with people. So like love connecting with people there, but it could be Instagram. That's probably like where I limit most of my time from a social media perspective. I think the second one, which is like super important, is like old school contact. So like in my phone, if I meet like Shar from Florida, I'd actually put Shar from Florida in the phone, because it just serves as a reminder for me, like where we connected and built some proximity. And then the third one, which is really like a superpower that, I thank my parents and the creator for giving me, which is I'm really, really good at faces and names. Like my parents are
Oh,
military.
good.
Yeah. So I may not remember like the location where we met, but I will remember like, oh my goodness, like Shar, super engaging, loves people. Like I'll never forget that. Plus
Oh,
the first time
they call me Shar from HR.
oh, nice.
It
Okay.
arrives.
Okay.
It arrives.
So you won't forget that.
There we go. There we go.
Okay. But here's my problem when you're on an island. One, if you're jumping off a boat, your boat's going to get your phone's going to get wet. So you have to have a dry bag. Okay.
For sure.
And then two, obviously you don't have internet. So
You know what?
sometimes go ahead.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I was just about the phone thing, because I was just in the when I was in the islands a couple month ago or so. This girl just jumped right in with her phone, her iPhone, $1,000, just jumped right in with her phone. And then, and I was like, oh my God, your phone's it's gonna be ruined. And she was like, no, they're waterproof or water resistant now. And I was like, oh,
Wow.
that's so I
I
would
saw
still,
that advertised. I can't believe that really works.
yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
she said she was doing it. I'd be scared to death to do that, but
Me
or at least
too. It sucks
But
without your phone. Personal
she
experience.
she probably had one of those cases that allow her to do that. Like I don't think any phone without a case just allows you to jump in and
Yeah. Well,
I don't know if that's a
Yeah.
wise decision.
yeah, well, of course, she was in her 20s, and the reckless nature of youth, right? They'll do things. But no, it was definitely an iPhone, and because my son, who was enamored with her, was out there with her, and she dropped her phone in the water, and he picked it up, and it was an iPhone. It was fully functional. So I don't know. Maybe she
That is
sprayed
amazing.
this fancy thing. I don't know.
Yeah, phone technology is insane these days. I've been phone shopping and I'm telling you, oh my goodness, it's insane.
Yeah.
They
You know,
fold open now and all kinds of crazy stuff.
you can get a big screen TV now, Shar, for like a third of the price of a smartphone.
I
And they
know.
call them smart TVs, way more screen, way more
Yeah.
functionalities. Wow.
So,
Yeah.
kind of carry a TV around for me with it. No, yeah, but that's true. Isn't that amazing? I mean, I remember, when I bought my first flat screen TV, I spent. I mean, I would be embarrassed to say how much I spent on it, but
Yeah.
it was several thousands of dollars for that first flat screen, and now you can just get them for $500. So it's
Yeah.
just nuts. Yeah.
It's cool. Well, we have exciting lives and we're so excited to have everybody joining us.
Yes. So for our listeners out there that are joining in, we're going to get started here in just a few minutes. And so we're just chatting about those lovely things in life. Donald, you're in Atlanta right now. I mean, I just thought of you because I just got somebody reached out to me to be a keynote speaker in for the Atlanta Compensation Association in October.
nice.
So I'm really excited about that. We're going to talk about how AI is going to be used in compensation and HR things, and so AI is a hot topic nowadays. So I'm excited to go down there. Hopefully, you're in town when I'm there, and I'll look you up.
Oh, dude, yeah, I'd love to show you some VIP treatment if you come down to Atlanta. I would extend that to you, Shar, as well. We love to show what real hospitality looks like in the great city of Atlanta. So anytime you're in town, just let me know. We got some places.
I'll drag my fiance down there. We visited Atlanta and all kinds of places too.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
And I love that hospitality.
Our
That's what the South is known for, right? Atlanta is known for.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Good food.
Our food scene is completely underrated. Like when people
I
get
know.
here, like, oh my goodness, I didn't know the food was so good. I'm like, yeah, like it's pretty good here.
Yeah, I would say that's why we moved to Puerto Vallarta too. I mean, Belize is nice, but it's so darn windy on the island, San Pedro Island, where Madonna sings.
Okay.
But it's so darn windy. So we chose Puerto Vallarta because of the food.
Okay. And do you split your time there?
Yeah, I live here half the year here. I leave June 5th and then I spend half my year in Colorado. So I don't travel as much as you probably, but we try to get out and other fun locations and with business, and I have many business ventures too. So we try.
Nice. How was the powder this past season in Colorado?
Oh, it's beautiful. The snow here was just phenomenal this year. I had just at my house here, I had like over 4 feet of snow, and it's just starting to disappear right now. I could still make a snowball in the front of my house if I wanted to. So,
oh wow,
yeah, but the powder was just phenomenal this year. I mean, skiing was great for sure.
Yeah, Durango's beautiful.
Yeah, it is. All right, we are at the top of the hour, and so I do want to kick things off and get things going here. So welcome everyone to the People Strategy Forum podcast, and we're a show that guides leaders how to elevate their overall workforce. And we believe that every great leader inspires and motivates and reward their people for their performance. And we believe that people are at the heart of every organization. So it's an important piece that we're trying to bring awareness and how to these better people strategies to elevate the workplace overall. So today I want to tell a little bit about our hosts and a little bit how we do things here. And so there's some of you that are maybe joining us here live on the Zoom platform. If you are, I mean, feel free to use the chat box there and ask questions as we go along. And Shar is going to be monitoring that today. And one thing to know is that we're going to be multicasting this event. It's going to be found on, well, right now it's showing on LinkedIn, it's on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook, and so all those particular locations. And then in a couple of weeks from now, we're going to have this also posted on our podcast, which will go living on forever in Foreverland, right? So. The first thing I want to do is introduce some of our hosts here. We have Shar Miller. And so I call Shar our serial entrepreneur. She's a founder of Mountain and Sea Career Strategy for Leaders. And she also runs a health advocacy organization. So Shar is in many of the hats that she wears. She's a chief people officer of Rocky Mountain Health Advocates. And so we're very pleased to have her here today. Now,
Thank you.
We don't have Sumit Singla joining up yet, but he might join us. So I'm just going to introduce him a little bit because everybody knows Sumit. But he's an experienced HR consultant dedicating to helping small and medium-sized enterprises scale up globally. And he has some deep expertise and a diverse background, which includes working at some top firms like Accenture, Deloitte, Aon, and GE. So he's a huge advantage to have him here on the forum. So hopefully he'll join us up here shortly. And myself, I'm Sam Reeve. I'm the founder of Comp Team, a talent and employee compensation company. And so I'm a certified global compensation professional, and I help companies scale in that critical infrastructure that they need to retain their top performers and attract the best people to work at their organization so that they can motivate the overall workforce through some of these pay and talent strategies. All right. Today, we're going to discuss the power of empathy in building a people-first culture. And we have the honor today of hosting a true trailblazer in the field of HR, a visionary leader who has redefined the role of Chief People Officer, Mr. Donald Knight. Donald Knight is the Chief People Officer of Greenhouse Software, and he brings a wealth of experience and his dynamic approach to the table of these people strategies. His impressive track record speaks volumes about his ability to drive growth and increased value through people-centric strategies. And what really truly sets Donald apart is his unwavering belief in the power of human performance. And so I'm super pleased to have him here on the podcast. I know his insights and expertise is going to offer us some valuable lessons and inspire all of you listeners out there to elevate your game as a people practitioner. So without further ado, let's welcome Donald Knight to the People Strategy Forum podcast. Donald.
Sam, thanks for having me. Super excited to talk to you all today, right in the middle of my week, which allows me to have just a nice energy boost to finish the week. So literally, thank you for having me here.
Pleasure having you.
So Donald, I know you as I've experienced your leadership firsthand with as you coach executives and on your team and so forth. You bring this panache, this style that just I just love to see. It's so unique, getting people energized and engaged as they come into meetings, so they have the right mindset. And so that's something I just love about your style and how impactful you are. But for our listeners out there, I just want to dive a little bit into what made you the person you are today and your path towards being a people-centric leader. So can you fill us in on the story there?
Absolutely, man. First and foremost, I need to hang out with y'all during the week more often. If I'm ever having a stressful week, I just need to call the team up and talk to you and Shar. Look, I think there's three major things that have shaped my entire life. I think the first one is I have to give extreme reverence and appreciation to my parents. Both my parents were in the military. They both served in the U.S. Army. We moved all over the place. Before the age of 14, I lived in 6 states, 3 countries. And the beauty of that is my best friends were always either coming or going. So Shar, to your point around being a people person, like I totally connect and dig with you there. Like I don't live in Puerto Vallarta, but I totally understand like how that makes you feel, like the energy you get from hanging around people. That resonates with me because that's what I got, like moving so many different places. The other thing though is like my appreciation of so many other people's culture and their way of life and where they landed on the planet. It's just extremely high, right? So you'll never hear me say like I live in America and people live abroad, because that's not a global way of talking. No one in Italy says you live abroad in US. Like no one says that. So like that's the first thing, is like my parents, like they help shape me from that perspective, moving me around and my siblings around so much. I think the second one for me is there's this amazing woman named Kay Kennedy who actually convinced me to go into HR. We didn't have a Shar in HR when I was coming up. And so I didn't like HR. Like, I thought it was like, you don't go talk to those people. Like anytime you talk to them, it's like, you have to advocate for yourself for like money, or you're getting in trouble. They didn't seem like it's like fun. And so I tried to stay away from them. But Kay was the one that really like convinced me to like, hey, like you can make meaningful impact in business because you understand what most business leaders don't understand, which is people. And I didn't really look at that as like a superpower. Like I didn't think seeing and valuing others was like something that can help me in business. But you know, almost 20 years later, she was right. And so I give a lot of credit to her. And then I think the last thing is like, Sam, you know this, man, I'm just a continuous learner. I don't feel like I know it all. Part of the reason like I encourage my team so much, or like why I give them like the rah-rah speeches, because in so many cases I've learned from them. And so like, I know we've partnered with you, Sam, and comp team on some of our stuff. And I just want to say thank you for your leadership and your team's leadership. But like, I've learned more from my director of people rewards, Tisha, than she probably could say that she learned from me since she's joined in November. Her wealth of experience being in so many different places, that's indicative of how I've been able to be marginally successful in business. And I think people like that. I think people, they feel that authentic energy and authenticity that comes with living in so many different places. They feel welcomed and their voice is appreciated. And I think there's this young lady named Nia Darville who leads our IDEA activations, and IDEA stands for Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, Allyship. And she was just like, you know what it is, Donald? It's like, you're just really good at giving people oxygen in the room. Like they've been in rooms where they felt suffocated and not seen. And like, if people need to breathe, they can call you. So when you said that, you know, you feel that in my leadership, like that makes me feel good. Like I can do a cartwheel right now, just because I'm glad you feel that. I want people to feel that when they experience me.
Yeah, it's truly engaging, and it's I just love the passion and power, and I think that's part of the thing that I think you really brought out the core piece of that, having something that's some worldly experience, coming from and being familiar with other places on the globe, really gives us an understanding of the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion. The fact that there's different perspectives out there, different ways of life, and we all work in a different way. And so I think that that gives us a great power and understanding how to be great leaders for organizations in a people-centric way. But one thing I want to dive into is how the world is changing. You know, right now, I think we're in a period of acceleration, and we're seeing some wonderful technologies come out and so forth. And we've all just gone through a very difficult time in our lives. In the past 5 years, it's been quite difficult, and still proves to be difficult in this environment. But one thing that proves to hold true is that there's a greater focus on humanity and empathy for people. And I would love to hear about your perspective on that, Donald, about how important it is to be human-centric in today's world.
Yeah, man, that's a great pivot. You mentioned AI. I'm going to date myself a little bit. I am old enough to remember growing up, AI meant Allen Iverson, one of the greatest basketball players to ever come from the state of Virginia. And now I've lived long enough where my 12-year-old, Dalen, AI to him means artificial intelligence. It means Chat GPT. And it's mind-boggling for me that we both lived in the exact same time, but have very different defaults on what those two letters actually mean. But I tell you that story because I think it leads into things like empathy, right? So I think it starts with this idea that people's starting place may be very different than your own. And as a leader, one of the things I'm challenged with every day is to make sure I'm like creating or fostering this environment where empathy is free flowing, right? Like in times of like difficult economic times, that's where things like empathy and vulnerability are super important. Because to your point, Sam, it like makes people feel the human side of leadership. And I feel like in the past, like if you talk to like prior generations of leaders, those weren't like the default skills that people would talk about for you to be successful in business, right? Like for Shar to be successful in business, today, she's demonstrating that connection with people and like really understanding who they are. Like you could just see, like she smiles every time we talk about people. It's because like that's where her energy comes from. But like if we were trying to figure out who was Shar, who was the Shars and the Donalds and the Sams 30, 40, 50 years ago, those habits around empathy, that wouldn't be the default skills that people were having. It was understanding compliance. And it was understanding how do we make sure that the business is profitable? And how do we measure productivity? And how do we make sure people continue to work the assembly line, right? Like, so what we've seen is like this evolution. The way I try to explain it is like, if you look at how long humans have been on the planet and you made it a book and each page represented 250 years, well, the book didn't really get good to like page 998. And today we're on page like 1000, right? It didn't even like get the stuff that we're talking about now. You think about how many evolutions have happened just in our time frame. And so the empathy, those human skills, not soft skills. There's nothing soft about demonstrating empathy for people. And it showed up early in my career. Like I used to, when I first started interning in undergrad, I was doing employee and labor relations. And I can tell this story now, but if you had talked to me 20 years ago, there's no way I would tell this story. I was ashamed of this story, but I can tell it now. So I was doing employee and labor relations for Department of Defense. We had 180,000 employees, particularly in the business I was in was the Defense Commissary Agency. It is super unique, and it's not because I worked there. It's super unique because they sold grocery. It's still the only retail business that's owned by the US government. And there was a young lady, she was a military spouse, she was a mom of 3. She was always showing up late to work. And so you know what happens, like we all know this. You have the conversation, you document, you have the conversation, there's discipline. You have the conversation, she's trending towards like legit termination. So she was on like, don't do this again. And I see Shar's face. So she's like, yep, I've had a few of those. People don't know how to show up on time. I know. And so she was late and we called, she didn't answer. And then she didn't show up. So we termed her. It's the right thing to do. I looked at the rules, it was black and white. I was young in HR. It's like, this makes all the most sense. And when we went to arbitration, because she was part of the collective bargaining unit, what I ended up finding out was her husband was deployed. And the eldest daughter had ran away because it was the anniversary date of when he was supposed to be home, but he was still not home. And that's the reason she didn't prioritize coming to work. She prioritized family. And that one story like taught me early in my career the importance of empathy, the importance of trying to really understand, like, yeah, these are the rules. We got a business to run. I get it. But like, you also have to be empathetic for people's situation and trying to figure out what they're going through. And I vowed to that young lady, her name is Danetta. I don't know what she's doing now. I don't know where she lives now, but I told her name is Danetta. And I said, Danetta, you've taught me like probably the most memorable lesson for me as a leader, which is always lead with empathy. Always assume that you don't know what's going on in someone else's life. And it influences the way that I talk to people on my team. Like if their energy's different, I'm like, hey, what's going on? Like your energy's off. What's going on? And like most leaders don't do that. So.
Yeah. Anybody that's heard our podcasts and our recordings over the years, in my 25 years of corporate world, I always felt like kind of a Joan of Arc, where literally I'd have the CEO yelling at me to fire people. And they had a special list of people they wanted out of the organization. But of course, what am I going to do? Tell the CEO that this person's on FMLA, that they have a disability, that they have a special circumstances, trying to protect HIPAA laws and protect the person, but at the same time, be that fine balance. Also, I'm a very empathetic person. I mean, I lead with my, passion, dignity, and respect. And that's why when I started my own company, I applied our TMA and one of our tools that our company likes to use. And it's all about positive psychology. And the beauty of it is I was able to accommodate people with all kinds of disabilities and wheelchairs and all kinds of situations in their life circumstances, families, mothers, older generations, and it created a very positive culture. And as a result, we became a multi-million-dollar business. And when we had to close down, and when we terminated our employees, I was getting hugs because they said, you prepared me to move to a better job. So I love what you're saying, Donald. It's totally in my heart.
Yeah, no, that's, I'm glad it resonates in your leadership as well, Shar. Like, especially in, like, to your point around those, when you see those economic headwinds and you have to make tough decisions like reductions in force, one of the greatest compliments is people being able to not only demonstrate embrace for you as a leader, but if they would opt back into your leadership again. And so there's so many companies that talk about quality of hire. I look forward to the day we get to talk about quality of leadership. When you start to talk about how many people have left your teams, but they would opt under your leadership again. How many people have moved on in their career, but they speak fondly of you the way I speak about Kay, or the way some of those people may be speaking about you, Shar. So yeah, I think it starts with
it's an honor. It's an honor that I have many employees that say I was one of their best leaders, but I also have employees that say they didn't like Shar. So, I wasn't liked by all my employees, particularly in a union organization. That's a little tough. But it's a fine balance. I mean, it's like you have to have a kind of a psychology perspective, and then also, the analytical perspective and business sense. It's a very fine balance as an HR leader. So I love what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, one thing, Donald, I mean, I just love to hear your perspective. You mentioned that, we need to be, as leaders, we need to be aware of our people and see of those behavior changes that happen. If a person might be upset or on edge one day, or me not being in that same character. So how do we ensure that first, how do we ensure that we are observing that behavior in like remote environments and so forth? I mean, do you have some examples that you can provide that leaders can improve how they can improve their empathy and that gauge to determine whether or not something is going wrong with their people?
Yeah, totally. That's a great question, Sam. I think the first thing I would say is I don't want to assume that everybody has seen what intentional leadership even looks like when it comes to things like empathy. I don't want to assume that people have seen that demonstrated, because what I have found in my career, like as I've continued to progress, is like that's not the case. Some people have worked in environments where they have not seen that. And so it's through that lens that I'll answer your question, which is like the first thing is around just like awareness. That emotional awareness to be able to know what's happening with folks on your team is super important. And in order for you to be aware, you got to have real proximity with them. And I don't mean physical proximity, right? Like, Sam, I don't think you and I have actually ever met in person, but I know a lot about you. I know where you live. I know where you travel. I've heard about your family. I've heard about your career. Because you and I, when we talk, we don't talk about business all the time. We talk about each other as humans. Like, what's going on in your life as a human? What's going on? And yeah, we get the business stuff done. So for those that are looking for an amazing comp consultant, like, look no further than Comp Team, I can strongly endorse them because I've been partnering with them for over the last 6 months, right? But that's not where real proximity, in order for you to be emotionally aware, you can't just talk about business all the time. So I've had conversations with folks on my team about everything under the sun. Babies getting sick all the time. Come to find out, my 12-year-old, when he was young, he used to catch everything. Apparently, it's still true. Kids are still catching everything. And empathy to be flexible on meeting start times because they got to run to urgent care or go pick up pediatric formula, or for their caregivers that are doing caregiving for their parents and trying to understand what that looks like. So like, part of the empathy starts with like emotional awareness, but that emotional awareness only happens if you build real human to human proximity. And I'll give you an example. Like on our team, with our entire people team, some of our monthly team meetings, I'll kick them off and say, hey, listen, we can get into the business, but like the first 15 minutes, we just need to have a human to human conversation. Tensions are high right now. Emotions are high right now. Let's acknowledge that. I think if you think about like the post George Floyd, I think was the first time globally the world was able to like somewhat slow down and like have more of these types of conversations. But to me, it's around that proximity. And then I think the last thing is like create space for people. There's 2 questions I ask people on my one-on-ones, and I will give this to you for free. This is not a charge. The first one is, what barriers to your success can I help remove? I always end my meeting with that. I want to create a space for people that if they're having a barrier of any kind, let them share that. And most of the time, those barriers are professional. So I often don't hear the personal things in life that may be stopping them from being successful. So since then, I've added a second question that I started last year when I joined Greenhouse, which is, what's throwing you off your game? It's simple. Like, what's throwing you off your game? Sometimes people will join and they got like the most amazing excitement, similar to Shar. They're like, nothing's throwing me off my game. I'm crushing it. I got this client. I'm talking to this. I'm working on this project. I'm like, great. Glad you're on your game. Great. But some of those same people will use that as an opportunity to be like, look, my mom is sick. Or we just lost my grandfather. Or my kid cried the entire time on the plane and I felt embarrassed that I was being disruptive to people on the plane.
Yeah.
Or I've heard things around like parent guilt. I've heard things around like dads traveling and feeling like they're missing out on things. And I've heard moms traveling and they feel like they're missing out on things. I've talked about things around like emotional labor and mommy guilt. And I mean, like all of these things happen when you just create space for people to share. And so for me, I think what really resonates with the team is the fact that I'm creating the space in the first place, that if there's something bottled up that they can share.
So you probably said this, but is that online discussions or do you have the beauty of having in-person discussions predominantly for you? How do you do that?
Oh, that's a great question, Shar. They're both. Like our company is fully distributed. We want it to be able to tap into talent all over the world. And so we have talent that sits in most of the 50 states. We have talent in Canada and we have talent in Ireland. So sometimes those meetings are over Zoom more frequently, but sometimes they're in person. Like I do this with our executive leadership team too. So like one of our co-founders who I get to nerd out with a lot, his name is John Strauss. And when I go to New York, we call it strolling with Strauss. And literally our one-on-ones is just walking through the parks or walking up the different streets in New York. And we'll have those like, John, what's throwing you off your game right now, man? And come to find out, like sometimes, most times, nothing's throwing him off his game. He's doing really, really well. But in those ever so often moments when something is, like just being able to have a listening ear that's empathetic to whatever's going on in their life, it makes a world of difference.
And I think that's the important thing that we need to think about as leaders because we're often trying to increase performance in our organization, where we have to do more with less during these difficult times and so forth. And I think that you brought up a really good point, Donald, is that sometimes to increase the performance, we need to open our humanity. We need to ask questions, like you just mentioned. What are those barriers? What's getting in your way of what's throwing you off, as you mentioned. So I think that's a huge call out for leaders out there. But what I want to dig into now is that you mentioned that one of the things that helps spread this across the organization is really modeling that behavior. So I know,
Yeah.
Donald, you're an exceptional leader, and you model this great performance. But how do you encourage your executives, your peers, to model the same behavior and be as open as you are?
Yeah. I feel very fortunate that we subscribe to this idea of putting people first at Greenhouse. Like, we don't make a business decision without calculating the impact it's going to have on people. So culturally, it wasn't a heavy lift for me, Sam, if I'm honest with you, to model that and lead by example. But it's also sharing that. I share my failures. Like, I share that, like, anybody who works at Greenhouse can tell you this. Like, there was a time where I put a message into the all company channel, and I let them know, look, if I haven't been that jovial, high energy, fist pumping guy for you over the last 2 weeks, I want to acknowledge that I haven't been that person, because, like, my brother and my sister-in-law, they were trying to have a kid, and it was touch and go. It was tough. And like, just seeing the overwhelming support from people inside of Greenhouse was amazing. But I think even more importantly, like, having leaders see me as a person on our exec team share that in a shared space in our Slack channel. Oh, dude, it gave them permission to be that type of leader too, right? And so that's how I try to do it, is like, in my one-on-one instances and occurrences, creating that space, but also in shared spaces. Like, I don't mind being the guy who, when I'm good and everything's great, I'm gonna give you this Char energy. Like, we're gonna run through walls. It's gonna be super exciting. But there's also gonna be times when I'm not that guy, and letting people know, is helpful. It helps them demonstrate empathy with me as a leader, which is huge. So yeah, like, I try to lead by example, but I think culturally it's easier. It was easier for leaders to accept that, because we do typically try to find ways to put people first.
And I just want you to know, I do have a red side when it comes to people. But I'm one of those that I put up with all the BS and I let it stuff. Speaking of volcanoes, I'm nice and nice and nice, and then all of a sudden I'm making another island.
I like how you brought that full circle.
See,
Yeah.
but not you have to do it in a professional way. I can be the business person and lay off 80 people in a day. It's just a matter of how, and I have, sadly. However, it's about people-focused planning and involving your CFO and involving the decision makers into the people-focused process, and literally standing in front of the board and explaining how the impact to the community, and removing a corporate division out of the downtown, and where you live. If you actually remove 80 employees from downtown central location, how are we going to take care of our community and our people, and then also help our employees find new positions within the organization? So my strategy has always been to always focus on career mobility and prepare employees for those changes, because in this day and age, these things are going to happen overnight. So in every single one of my meetings, I always prepared my employees for a change that could happen overnight. And in my case with Rocky Mountain Health Advocates, because of the federal regulations and the changes with reimbursements in healthcare, it happened overnight. So we were able to utilize the PPP and various other resources that many companies were lazy about. And we were able to prepare our employees for that major impact.
Yeah.
And I think one of the big pieces on that, and when we covered this a little bit earlier, is when you put people first, when you're thinking about people-centric ways that through, of course, you've developed relationships with these people, these people that you might have to say goodbye to. And the important thing is to make sure that you have you make it the best experience as possible. And so what are some of the ways you think, Donald, that we can help our leaders listening to right now, if they have to say goodbye to some of their colleagues their trusted colleagues that have contributed so much to their organization? What is the guidance that you would give them to do that in a way where those people are leaving with their dignity intact, and that are ambassadors for the company and understanding what's happened?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think a lot of people struggle with this question, Sam, which is like, you want to be an empathetic leader. You want to be able to like put people first, but equally at the same time, like there's also business objectives that you have to make. And so like, how do you make sure that you're putting people first, but also managing the business? And I feel like the way I always tell people is like, if you prioritize people, you'll always meet the business need. And I'll give you an example. Like if you go on my LinkedIn, anybody can go there. We recently did have some very difficult decisions to make. And one of the ways that I've tried to make sure that I demonstrate that empathy and demonstrate putting people first is like, did we make the decision through the lens of how it would impact our people? And like, how do we make sure that we can let them know their value is not diminished because of a business decision? Like I've always told people, like your value is not defined by your salary. Your impact is not defined by if a company chooses to retain you or not. You have value because you're human. And sometimes that means your tour of duty or the time that you're spending with people at a particular organization may change, and that's okay. But that doesn't define your value. If your boss doesn't give you a promotion, that doesn't mean that your contribution is meaningless. That's not what that means. And I think so often we have propped up people who have been outwardly successful, whether through promotion or through wealth attainment or through title, that it sends the wrong signal to others that that's not where real value is derived. And so for me, if you go to that page, and I encourage everybody to go to my page, if you want to connect, I'm happy to connect with you. But the more important reason why I would actually ask you to go to my page is we set up an inbound form for any company to tell us about open career opportunities at their company. I wanted anybody that was a Greenhouse alumni to know, just because you're alumni, Donald still has your back. And our goal is to get you to land as quickly as possible. I have personally served as references. I have personally brokered intros between people that were departing. That's the empathy side. I've personally called on friends in my Rolodex and said, hey, Sam, you're looking for a comp person. We had a comp person that was impacted. I'm using that as an example because our comp team was not impacted, but still, like you get my drift, which is like, there's a way to do that. There's a way to make sure people know that you may be changing jerseys, but I care about the person underneath the jersey. It's less about if you're wearing our company, crest or our company logo. And I can tell you like what that has meant to people far exceeds any business decision we've ever had to make. Like the return on empathy is like phenomenal. These people are like, oh my goodness, like One guy sent me an email, and I won't disclose his name because I didn't ask him, but it might be the greatest piece of feedback I've received all year, which was, he was like, Donald, the hardest part about this decision is actually less about the disruption in my career and what this will do to my family. Like it's like, I'll find another role. His concern is that now that he's seen an empathetic leader and what that looks like day to day, his concern is that he may be forced to work in an environment with a leader that's not like that. And he knows there's better out there. He's experienced it, he's witnessed it. And his concern is like, now that I've experienced that, my concern is like, to put food on the table, I may have to subject myself to an environment like that. Man, I read that email, I was almost in tears. Like, call my CEO, I was like, dude, this is heavy. And
That's
so
nice.
as you can imagine, I'm like super invested in making sure where he lands, like
Yeah.
super invested.
Yeah, and then
That
one
is a fantastic story. Go ahead, Sam.
And just one thing,
We have a
Shar.
question.
Yeah, the one that's, I think that's the main reason why the People Strategy Forum does what it does, because it's so important to ensure that your experience, I mean, that we create good practices across the industry in a way that elevates leadership to have that empathetic style of leadership. I just wanted to point that out. Go ahead, Shar.
I just wanted to bring up, we have a question actually from our chat here.
Okay.
Anna Pastiglione. So I don't know Anna, if I'm saying her name correctly. I think this is to you, Donald. It says, I appreciate your leadership skill being empathetic. Can you elaborate on how you would be empathetic and still meet the business needs at the same time? And also, because sometimes it could come across as certain groups of employees receiving a special accommodation. Thank you.
That's a great question, Anna. And I believe I used to live in Naples. I think it's Pastiglione. I could be wrong, but if it is, let me know. I haven't lived in Italy in quite some time. It's a great question. Perfect. Yeah, let's do it. All right. Great question. The way I'd answer that question is, in every business decision you make, just make sure you consider people. So I'll give you an example, like reductions in forced layoffs. There are some companies that they looked at how they were trending financially, and they said, expenses too high, growth not happening, revenue down, we need to cut 9%, go make it happen. That's what some companies did. It's a business decision, did not calculate the impact on people. There were other companies that said, economy's bad, revenue's down, need to decrease our expenses. Where should we start? Should we consider business travel? Should we consider stipends? Should we consider closing offices? What are all these other trade-offs we can make? Knowing we still got to hit this number, but what are the trade-offs we can make? And then ultimately, if they still had to make an impact on people, they can tell them with a straight face, here's all the trade-offs that we've made. And in making all these trade-offs, we see no line of sight to reducing our expenses without having a tough decision to make about our people. There were companies that made that decision. Same outcome, different path. And I know those second companies because we were one of them. The other thing I would tell you about the accommodations, which is important, which is, and I'm going to be like, I'll try to reserve my passion here, which is part of the reason we have an idea team. We believe inclusion is an output. So inclusion happens when diversity, equity, and allyship are present. And so what do I mean by that? If, I don't know, Sam, tell me how tall you are. I've never met you in person. How tall are you?
6 feet.
He's 6 feet. Okay. Shar, how tall are you?
5'3" 3/4.
5'3" 3/4. Okay. And
Almost
I'm
5'4".
Okay. And I'm 5'9", right? So if both of us wanted to look, if all three of us wanted to look over a 6-foot fence, Well, Sam can see it pretty easily. Walks up to the fence, see over the fence, not a problem. For me to see over the fence, I probably need like a 3-inch stool. Get the 3-inch stool, I can see over the fence. For Shar to see it, she needs about a 6-inch stool. She gets the 6-inch stool, she can see over the fence. Now, here's the beautiful thing. Now all of us can see over the fence. That doesn't mean now Sam, see, thank you. There you go, right? Sam shouldn't then say, well, why didn't I get a stool?
Exactly.
You don't need a stool. You can see over the fence. So to the second part of your question around the accommodations, Anna, I try to make sure people are treated equitably, not equally. Equally would have meant everybody get a stool, even if you don't need one. Equitably means you get a stool if you need one, and let's make sure we get one that's the appropriate height for you. And so when you're making some of these business decisions, particularly like people with disabilities, we saw this in the pandemic. They've been telling companies that they can do these jobs from home for years. Companies said they couldn't. And then when able-bodied people went home because they were forced to, now all of a sudden people can work remote and hybrid. And so when you're thinking about the accommodations, just make sure that as long as you're treating people equitably, accommodations are okay. But if you're treating people inequitably, if you're paying men more than you're paying women, if you're retaining Sam because he's the buddy of the CEO, but you're not retaining Shar, even though her performance is better, that's an issue. Just make sure that the accommodation is seen through the lens of equitability. And I promise you, people can understand that. You won't be able to solve everybody. Like there'll still be some Sams out there that get mad at not having a stool. Lucky for me, this Sam is not one of those types of people. So
no, he's an amazing leader. And I had this argument many, many times. We had certain departments like coding departments and physician billing departments. But I had leadership that absolutely refused to allow people to work from home. And if you're going to have your employees work from home, you got to think about ergonomics and proper working environment and, sending your employee health department at home and helping create a good work environment for them.
Right. And one thing I want to just bring up about where we're talking about accommodations and doing things differently for different people based on need. That's super important why we need to ensure we're communicating effectively about our programs. If we communicate the intent, then it creates understanding of why one person didn't get the stool where everybody else might have one. So that's why we really need to become, I think as leaders, one of the biggest skills that we can have is effective communication. But one thing I'd like to dive in here again on, Donald, is just back to Greenhouse. Now, Greenhouse is an exceptional platform that helps companies, enable their talent acquisition efforts. And one thing that Greenhouse has done effectively well, as you alluded to earlier, is it brings in people with similar values that in a very diverse way, to where it creates an overall environment for Greenhouse itself as being a very inclusive, very collaborative of leadership style. So you don't have to do too much heavy lifting there, as you mentioned earlier. But some of our leaders out there that are listening didn't have the advantage of the Greenhouse platform to bring in that exceptional talent. And they do have people that may not have the same value set, may have had done some bad things that are against the values of the organization. And so how do we approach that in an empathetic way, knowing that somebody has erred because maybe their values are significantly different or from their experiences? What do you think?
Yeah, that's another great question. I want to give a huge shout out to Samaya. I don't know Samaya personally, but I saw the comment in the chat that they had basically taken the company more hybrid prior to COVID. And when COVID started, they didn't miss a beat. Samaya, kudos to you and your leadership team for those efforts. You're really blazing a trail. So I don't know her personally, but I saw the chat. Yeah, when you have a mismatch in values versus actions and behaviors, it creates tension. And I remind our CEO all the time, there's positive tension is good. Like if we have a difference of opinion, that's great. We got diversity of thought. Like he says this all the time. He says, like, if you and I agree on everything, one of us is not needed. And he's the founder and CEO. So I better offer, some different thoughts, if you will, right? Or I'm not needed. But the negative tension, I believe, is what you're describing, Sam, which is if people have values and their behaviors and their actions inside of the culture is not living up to that, you got a real issue. Because what has happened is now that it's created a place where those things are fostered, that we can say one thing, but do something else. And so for folks that may be trying to figure out, like, how do I turn this around? You can turn it around. Like the first thing I would tell you is that you can create the change that you want to see inside of your organization. It starts with a few things. I always say it's the same 3 things, but I allow people to pressure test me and tell me if there's other things out there. I think the first thing is it starts with people, and you've talked about this a lot, Sam, on this call, which is mindset. You have to have a mindset that at least acknowledges that the environment that we have today is not living up to the potential that we could have. And we want to change that as a people, as a team, as a leadership. If you're not in leadership and you want to change it, there's this whole concept of influence without authority, where you don't need a title to be influential, right? Like you look at the suffrage movement. If we wanted to give equal rights to women, like women weren't in the leadership roles to create that, but they were able to influence without authority. Civil rights movement, same way. Like we got equal rights for people from different nations, color and creed and races, because people were influencing without authority. The same thing happens inside of an organization. If there's a nucleus of people that wants to move the organization where it could be, you don't have to be in leadership to do so. So that's the first thing, is the mindset of people. I think the second thing would be is like evaluate your processes. What are the things that are allowing the mismatch between the actions and behaviors from your values? What does that even look like? What are those processes that there's bias in said process, whether it's joining a Zoom call and not allowing everybody to speak? That's a process issue. One of the easiest ways to do that is to be like, hey, Shar, what do you think? Sam, what do you think? To make sure everybody's voice is heard. It's a process issue. So you can change the behavior if you switch the process. And then I think the last thing, which is super important, which is what tools are you using? If you use biased tools, you're going to get biased output. And I think one of the things that people really, really like about Greenhouse is that the tool itself is built by so many diverse people. And so when all these other companies that are also placing a value add on diversity of thought and diversity of gender and diversity of race and diversity of native tongue, the reason they're being successful with the tool is because like the tool was built for that type of environment. And for the folks that switch and they're like, oh my goodness, like we never had this before. I know, because many of the other tools are not built by diverse people. Like so that's where I would tell you is like people, that mentality. Second one is around the processes, and then what tools are you using? And if there's folks that want to like figure out like, hey, Donald, tell me more about the Greenhouse tool. Like we'll give them my email, we'll give them my LinkedIn somewhere in the show notes or in the post, Sam. I'm happy to have those conversations too. Absolutely.
Great. Well, I know that we are coming toward the end of our time right now. I want to acknowledge our speaker for next week, which is a great segue into what Donald just mentioned. This is, we're going to be hearing about Elizabeth Weingarten is going to share about those strategies that we can use to develop our leadership. And so in this context, Donald, what would be one of the questions that you would ask Elizabeth?
Oh my goodness, I'd ask Elizabeth tons of questions. There's 2 questions I legit absolutely need you to ask her. The first one is, when she's looking at developing leaders, there's so many folks that are seeing a shift either through upskilling. You talked about AI a little bit, but maybe they're moving into a different career path. So I'd be curious around how do you develop leaders who may have been subject matter experts in one area, but they're making that pivot? Like, how do we create an environment for their leadership to be developed, dealing with a different group of people? Like leading software engineers is very different from leading talent acquisition specialists. So like, that would be something that's interesting to me because I think we'll see more of that. I think you'll see more and more people diversifying how they contribute to the success of companies, the more and more we see more innovative technologies. And then my second one is, I promise you, it's just, you're probably not even prepared for this one. Her last name is Weingarten. And like my background tells me about Weingarten rights. So I'm curious, like, is there like a familial connection to the folks who paved the way for Weingarten rights? If you have never heard of Weingarten rights, I strongly encourage you to look them up. They were pivotal in shifting, you talk about equality and equitability of humans on this planet. So that would be my second one, which is, you know, I'm curious, is she connected to the people who wrote Weingarten rights?
Donald, I'm impressed. You're like a walking encyclopedia.
Yeah, absolutely. You remember everything, people's names.
But one thing you probably don't know, you don't realize, is that we share a similar passion, and I think that you handle this much better than I do. But for ice cream, is that right? Yeah,
absolutely.
And in my space, that extends to any kind of creamy foods, gelato or anything like that, so forth. So tell me, what's your favorite flavor, Donald?
Dude, oh my goodness. All right, cool. I'll tell you this. Yes, ice cream is a real thing for me. Like if you ever want to get on my calendar, just say you want to have ice cream, and I promise you, I will prioritize a couple scoops. My favorite right now, there's two. There's a young lady based out of Richmond, Virginia. She won the ice cream challenge on the Food Network. Her name is Rabia Kamara, and she owns a small ice cream shop called Ruby Scoops. It's small now. I think she'll be a staple for ice cream people moving forward. She has the only vegan ice cream I am willing to eat. Yeah, because she didn't compromise on the taste. It's like a caramel chunk. It's like, oh my goodness, I couldn't even tell it was vegan. And I'm not vegan, so nothing against vegans, but I'm just not one. So that was really good. My favorite though right now, shout outs to Jenny from Ohio, Jenny's ice cream. I used to love cinnamon skillet, and I still love it. It's good. But the one I've been eating a lot of is pancakes in syrup.
Wow.
OMG. Will change your life. And yes, some people are probably wondering, Donald, how much of an ice cream enthusiast are you? I have been known to eat pancakes and syrup for breakfast. Not often, but you know, on a Saturday, if I really want to feel good about myself because the week was a hard one, pancakes and syrup. Shout outs to Jenny's.
All right. That's awesome.
Yum, and you knew all their names too. And
Yeah.
company names.
Well, it's been a pleasure, Donald, having you on the forum. Thank you so much for just your energy, you know, being the leader you are, and then sharing your experience with all of us. I think that it's made a good use of all of our time and our listeners. So thank you so much for being here with us today.
Absolutely. Shar, Sam, thank you for having me.
All right.
Thank you. It's been delightful. I just love your energy, and as you can tell, we are both so behind your passion and your mission. It's amazing. And your mindset. That was mentioned by Anna too. It's all about mindset.
Nice.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in to the People Strategy Forum this week. We'll see you next week. Take care.